Hey guys, how y'all doing? Gibular Bob, wishing you all love from the VRML retirement home. Wanted to quickly make a video because there's a very interesting discussion that's happening in VRML feedback, and I wanted to dive in a little bit more on my perspective to this issue. So it started yesterday with a post. Shout out to Assyria, who raised a couple of concerns with the state of VRML. And their issues were, as you can see, no upsets, which, uh, and I wrote a post about this. You can't really force an upset to happen. It just kind of happens. That's what's unique about upsets. That's what's fun, because they're so surprising. We've also had the casting issue come up multiple times. Everybody's a volunteer. So the casting team can only cast when they can, and well, that's just the case. But the number one issue here was big teams that are household names that won't allow for anybody to get into a higher level of play. And they're so good that the skill gap makes it impossible to compete. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. I made a big, long, holy yap post last night, talking a bit more about big teams and my perspective on it. And I wanted to respond to Confessional's question, why is it even a problem? In any esport, there's big teams. Now, they do kind of answer their question at the bottom here, but for the uninitiated, I do want to dive a little bit more into this question because it has a significant impact on the state of your VRML and why things may seem to be, I guess, a little boring for some players. So that issue talks about the player economy. And I think this is really where there's a lot of problems with VRML right now in the way that players interact with the pro climate and how things work. So let's take a look at the NFL, for instance, and we'll talk a little bit more about why big teams in the NFL work and why the NFL is so successful, and then why Breachers is struggling in this specific category. So, the NFL, you've got a team, and the team has two basic ways to get players. You've got existing players in the NFL, so people from other teams who've already been experienced with the game of football at a professional level. You can move them laterally and they can join your team that way. So that's one way you can get players. And it may be a little less labor and resource intensive because these people already know football. They've already got experience working for pro teams. So it might make more sense. And, they could still very well have a ton of skills. So it can make sense to move people laterally, and pull from existing players. However, the NFL also has its pool of new talent. These are people from college football. These are people who are practicing, and they scouts in the NFL can tell that, wow, these players have a ton of talent and they could really fit on this NFL team. So when you have the NFL draft that rolls around, you can see that college players, this is their primary way of getting up into the big leagues. However, college players obviously don't have a ton of skill, right? They've played in college, but the NFL is a whole other ballpark. And there's a lot more practice and preparation and learning that needs to be done before they've reached their top level. But that's the point of new talent, is these teams have to cultivate that talent, and once they do, they can reap the benefits by having really, really strong players. So those are the two basic ways that teams can pool players. You've got, again, the existing players in the climate, and you've got your new talent. Now let's go over why this is a problem for VRML. if we look at top teams like Acer or IV or F3 in the past, they have, and this isn't to call out any team or to say you should harass somebody or that the entire problem comes from them. However, a lot of culture in the league in terms of player economy exists because top teams only pull from existing players. They only pull from the current pro climate, and this is what you'll see a lot of poaching. This has been a problem for many, many teams where they would steal players from other teams. And, if you're on Acer, you could really, in the season 2 era, even beyond, if you're Acer, you can really pick whoever you want because everybody wants to be on Acer because they've won all the time. And the same thing happened for IV. So these top teams only pull from existing players and they don't want to pull from the new talent. So this whole section is completely gone. Now you did have, and we'll do a little example here, V for Valor. I glaze Valor a lot, but in this case, they were very important for the pro economy because Crimson was one of the few players who pulled from new talent and added them to Valor, and he cultivated them. And that's how you got Blaze and a lot of other big names in the scene right now because they went to Valor initially and got really good on Valor. And of course, Valor didn't win any championships, and so Acer, IV poached these good Valor players, and they went into the existing players pool, and they got pooled and poached by top teams. And this is where the issue is because Valor, they got very demoralized because they had trained all their players. They got very good, but then the players left for better teams. So that discouraged Valor from doing anything. And so the only source of new talent is now gone. Excuse me. So we're now back into this area where top teams only pool and only want to pool from the existing player base because, again, it's easier. These players already have plenty of experience in VRML. They've already got plenty of time in the game. They know how pro play works. So top teams only pool from existing players. And so you look at IV, and anytime they get a new player on the team, it's always behind closed doors, right? There's no tryouts or open opportunities for them to scout new players. And again, it's not just IV. And of course, every team, there's no money in VRML, except for the usual prize pool at the end of the season. But that's where we have a problem, is because your top teams only pool from the existing players. And what happens to the existing players? They get older, they get jobs, they have to go to school, they get busy, or they just flat out get burnt out. And so they leave the game. And so you've got players who are now exiting from the existing players. And then that means that there's more demand for existing players because, again, nobody's pulling in any new talent. So this existing player base only gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until finally we get into kind of this state where you've got a wall for players, where the existing players who have been in the esport for quite some time sit at the top and hold on to all of the top teams, and you've got a lot of disbands and team reforming because there's not a whole lot of loyalty, right? And players just want to go to the bigger fish because that's going to increase their chance of winning. But sometimes you do have to do things the hard way, like in the NFL, because when you do that, that's going to keep the pro scene alive a lot longer because you're pulling in new people, you're creating more competition, and that's why you may see some top teams that win the Super Bowl more frequently in the NFL, but there's also more competition for it. You've got a whole season, you've got a postseason that's very competitive, and that's why the Super Bowl is, it can continue to be such a big event in football because they've got a healthy player economy. And so this is where we get to why big teams are the problem. Because when you don't have that player economy that everybody's looking for, then you get into trouble because the player pool is now shrinking. The players aren't remaining loyal to them, so teams can disband willy-nilly, and you get into this volatile league environment where teams just aren't holding together, and the top ones that do hold together stay at the top, and no new talent comes in, and we're kind of stuck. And the shrinking player base only makes things worse. So confessional does say if you want to cultivate a good team, you have to build. If you want to cultivate a good team, you have to build with people you trust to stay the course and practice to get to that level. And that's where we really get to the big solution: is that top teams, and really any kind of mid-ladder team as well, need to be doing more of what the NFL does. They need to be looking for new talent, and they need to be cultivating that talent to increase the skill and a pool of skillful players in league play, because that's going to make things more competitive. It's going to open the door for more competition and ultimately make league play more satisfying and more enjoyable for everybody, including casts and viewers. And it's going to encourage new players to get into the competitive scene. And that's really the core of this issue: is teams need to take the harder path sometimes and cultivate those new players, because there could be somebody out there who is playing Breachers well. They could be the next Acer, the next big team. But because nobody is recognizing that talent, nobody's inviting them, they might not even know that VRML exists, then you get that issue where that player is just not ever getting pulled into the competitive scene, even when it may greatly interest them. And that's the issue: is people need to recognize talent, invite more people into VRML, spend more time training, cultivating that talent, and then reaping the benefits of that, where you get to be a top team. Of course, loyalty is a big thing. If you've got a team that has really brought up your talent and has brought you to that top level, you really should consider remaining loyal to that team, right? Because the more time you put in, the more chemistry you build, the higher chance you have to break into that upper echelon of competitive breachers. But anyways, that's just my 2 cents on the matter. Sorry for the long video, but I definitely think VRML has the potential and the ability, especially in the breachers community, to continue growing. And we've already had so many amazing seasons, but this is just an issue. This is, one issue with the current state of VRML, but this is a big thing for breachers. Is just this player economy. More players have to come in, otherwise problems start. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed watching. Let me know your thoughts if you disagree in the comments below, and I'll see you all again soon.